So hello and welcome. Today we'll continue our exploration of the topic Mastering the Mind. We'll continue to explore how mindfulness can be an antidote to mental warfare. Last week we looked at step 1, which was building our awareness. And so today I'll share some reflections on step 2 in the process of mastering the mind, which is becoming the master. And then together we'll do a mindfulness practice starting with a body scan to hopefully ease any areas of tension that you might be having in your body, followed by a mindfulness of thoughts practice where you have a chance to put into practice this art of becoming the master. So part 1 of Mastering the Mind, we focused on building our awareness, noticing. The practice in this step is about building our mastery for simply noticing the nature of our mind, noticing the nature of our thoughts. Some call this, metacognition, or thinking about our thoughts. And in Buddhist psychology, they refer to this as seeing the waterfall. And we do this by really tracking the trends of our thoughts. And so some of you last week might have worked on creating your top 10 playlist of recurring thoughts. The thoughts that you find each and every day are recurring. We know that of the 60 to 80,000 thoughts that we have on any given day, 97% of those thoughts are recurring thoughts. And by really monitoring this trend and noticing, building your awareness around where your thoughts are going, a few things are possible. First, you can start to see the tendencies of our mind. You can also start to understand the power of the stories that we tell ourselves, the untrue stories that we often tell ourselves. 95% of our thoughts are unconscious. And these unexamined thoughts are like, I think of this as sort of a leaking pipe. They'll just keep flowing and flowing and flowing until we have a catastrophe, right? We might cause some major damage to the house. And the danger is when we start to believe these untrue stories to actually be true. So most importantly is that we can start to differentiate these stories from the direct experience of our life. And this, the act of differentiating, is really step 2 of the process of mastering the mind. This step of differentiating is where we actually become the master. And so we do this by unhooking our thoughts, or unhooking ourselves from the untrue stories that we tell ourselves. And with a certain quality of presence, which we'll practice today, we'll have more resourcefulness in exploring what might be the alternatives to the beliefs that we are holding to be true. And by doing that, we open the doors to our liberation. We can explore alternative options around what we want to believe, what we want to think and see in our lives to be true. I love this quote from Iyanla Vanzant that says, if you want to free yourself from the harshness of life, then you have to be clear of the harsh thoughts from your mind. If you want to be free from the harshness of your life, then you have to be clear of the harsh thoughts from your mind. And so that's what we'll start to practice today. You see, the key to this practice is really knowing when and how to unhook. And I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, my mom, who has done brain surgery right before the COVID pandemic, right as the outbreaks were starting to happen. And then a few weeks after, we had the scare that she might have COVID. She started to show signs and symptoms of COVID-19. And so I called her doctor and she said, yes, based on what you're telling me, I think that might be true. So why don't you come to my office, pick up a test, and then we'll get her tested. So I jump in the car, I'm on my way to the doctor, and I notice the nature of my mind, as I've come to learn, is to plan. So I tend to live in the future, right? I tend to think about plan A, plan B, plan C. Well, what does this mean? What are the risks? What do we need to mitigate for? And so what started to happen for me is I started to think, okay, well, what's going to happen if she tests positive? I mean, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. She has a history of emphysema. She's over 60. If she is tested positive and she goes into the hospital, maybe we'll never see her again because, we can't visit her. So my mind starts to catastrophize, right? I can see the planning nature of my mind, and I can see the negativity bias starting to take over, right? I started to focus in that moment on the negative possibilities rather than looking at the full picture. And so here is the power of this awareness, the power of me noticing in that moment that my catastrophizing mind was active. When I was able to see that catastrophizing mind pop up on the screen of my mind, I could acknowledge them as just thoughts. For me, it felt real in the moment, right? And naturally so. I mean, this is the possibility that might very well be true. These are the stories that we've been hearing about other people's situations. They get tested, it's positive, they go into the hospital, their family can't see them, and they die alone. And so my mind was starting to go off into that deep end. And so by noticing and really acknowledging that these are just thoughts and not necessarily reality, regardless of how real that possibility felt to me in that moment. And so with that awareness, I was able to more easily shift without being seduced by the story that to me felt real, but that was not simply true. And so I unhooked. I unhooked myself from this catastrophizing mind, from running off into the deep end, and I started to question, that might feel real, but is it true? And what else might be true? What alternatives might I consider? The test might be negative, right? And then I just reminded myself, be here now, right? Another practice that we can do is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Aligning the count with our senses. We can bring mindfulness to the moment and really observe 5 things that we can see, 4 things that we can hear, 3 things maybe that we can smell, 2 things that we can feel, maybe the air or the heat or a sensation in our body, and then 1 thing that we're grateful for in that moment. And so by doing that, by acknowledging those senses that might be present for us, it's a way of bringing our attention to the present moment. And so I realized, you're just in the car, you're on the way to the doctor, you'll pick up the test, you'll take it home, you'll drop it to the lab, and then we'll figure out what to do from there. And so we investigate our thoughts really so that we can liberate ourselves, right? That we can, by understanding the nature of the mind, I was able to identify, oh, I know my mind tends to go to planning. But there really is a balancing act between planning and catastrophizing and allowing the mind to go off into the deep end. And so this unhooking of the thought, bringing ourselves back to the present and then exploring other options, is really where we differentiate the process and become the real master of our mind. And so the practice here is learning to acknowledge the thought without being hooked or caught into the trance of that thought, right? The caution is to not be seduced by the story that we're telling ourselves. And so what we'll do here is to really see how we can create more options, see beyond the catastrophe, and then find more freedom and liberation for ourselves. And so that's what we'll practice today. I'm going to invite you to transition into the practice. Find a position that will allow you to breathe with ease and calm. And so you might find it helpful to close your eyes if you're comfortable. as we transition into the practice, allowing your mind to shift from the external occurrences of everything that's going on and really shifting your attention inward. If closing your eyes is somehow uncomfortable for you, you might find it helpful to just hold a soft gaze at the wall in front of you or maybe the floor. And we'll start here with a few deep breaths, allowing the power of the breath to not only cleanse our bodies, but to help us deepen a sense of relaxation. So elongating on the inhale and really feeling the breath in the chest and down into the diaphragm. And on the exhale, releasing any tension or distractedness that might be present for you in this moment. Continuing to breathe deeply. Again, with each exhale, allowing yourself to really sink in to this moment. Surrendering more and more to this experience. As we start our body scan, I'll invite you to bring your focus and attention to your feet. Noticing any sensations that might be there. Maybe noticing where your feet are making contact with the floor, the cushion, or the bed, whatever is beneath you. And as we continue to scan the body, the invitation is that you explore how it might be possible to soften and cultivate a sense of relaxation and calm and ease to the body. So we'll start by checking in with the knees, noticing the thighs, and seeing here if it might be possible to feel and notice the weight of your thighs. Seeing if perhaps there's a way that you can soften this part of the body. Noticing where your seat is making contact with whatever is holding you. Noticing the chair, the couch, the bed, the floor, the cushion that's beneath you. And continuing to breathe deeply, exhaling. And again, just giving yourself permission to be in this moment. Transitioning your attention to the back, and take note of the posture that you're holding. And maybe explore what adjustments might be helpful in allowing you to hold a posture that allows you to breathe with ease and calm. Notice if perhaps you're shifting forward or slouching back. Maybe you are leaning to the left or right. See how you might be able to adjust your posture in a way that allows you to not only breathe with ease, but also to be alert and relaxed. Continuing to breathe, we bring our attention to the shoulders and maybe lifting the shoulders up to the ears and back. Exhaling deeply. And maybe doing that a couple times because maybe it feels so good. On this next breath, I invite you to transition your attention to the jaw and see if it's possible to soften the jaw. You might find it helpful to slightly open the mouth, or maybe bring a slight smile, tilting the sides of the mouth upward. On this next breath, examining the muscles in the face, checking the lips, maybe the muscles around the eyes, checking the eyebrows, maybe bringing a hand to the face and seeing how you might be able to soften. And we'll pause here and just take a moment to notice our state of being. Noticing the state of our minds, noticing the quality of our presence, and bringing your attention now to the breath. See if you can locate the part of your body where you can really sense the breath. Perhaps you can notice the sound of the breath, or the sensation of the breath at the nostrils or the back of the throat. You might notice the movement of the breath in the chest or the belly. In this next breath, really anchoring and gathering your attention to really focus in on that part of your body where you can feel your breath the most. So gathering your attention here on the breath, will continue to use the breath as our anchor. So at any moment of the practice, if you notice that your mind has wandered, you can always bring your attention back to the breath. So notice. Without trying to control or change the breath in any way, just watching the breath do its thing. And shifting now to our practice, mindfulness of thoughts, I'll ask you to bring your attention to your thought life. And exploring any area in your life where you might be having some difficulty. It might be helpful here to examine if perhaps today there is an emotion that might be particularly intense for you. Maybe there's a person that you might be having some conflict with. But explore here in a moment, what is it about this area of your life that you're finding difficult? What is the situation, the circumstance, or the person that's involved? And if perhaps you find yourself confused or maybe flooded by a host of multiple scenarios or situations, really allow yourself to trust your instinct and choose the specific scenario that you believe in this moment deserves your attention. And so in this next moment, I'll ask you to just take a few moments to clarify the specific scenario that you will choose to examine in this practice. Continuing to breathe, and as you deepen the quality of your presence, assuming the seat of the witness, become the observer of your thoughts. And as if watching this scenario play out on the screen, without hooking to the story or the details of this scenario, just simply watching the details unfold. Where are you? Who is there with you? What are you doing? Maybe what you're wearing. Without becoming a character in the scene, really assuming the position of the observer, just notice the scene as if watching on the screen of your mind. Remembering that at any moment, if you find that you've been distracted, bringing your attention back to the breath. And when you're ready, returning your focus to the screen of your mind. Notice if perhaps you have some judgment on what is happening. Again, if you find that you're having any difficulty at all, just return your focus back to the breath, anchoring on your experience of the breath, taking as long as you need. And whenever you're ready, revisiting the scene of your mind. And now try to bring to the mind the key beliefs, the thoughts that you might be holding to be true about this scenario. What are you believing? You might find it helpful to finish one of the following sentences. They are unfair, unreasonable, unkind. I am right. I am responsible. I am bad. Fill in the blanks without judgment, whatever comes to mind. And if you're reflecting on a circumstance or a situation in general, you might finish the sentence, it is unfair, hard, challenging. Simply identifying whatever you might be believing to be true. And scanning these beliefs, see if you can identify the belief that stands out the most for you. You might be able to identify the belief that you sense is the strongest, the most important, the most obvious. Which of your beliefs is the strongest for you in this moment? Again, trusting your intrinsic wisdom to guide you in identifying whatever that might be. And noticing if there is any judgment here about being right and choosing the right one, or choosing a really good one. Letting go of any identification, any attachment to good or bad, right or wrong. Just allowing yourself to identify the belief that is strongest for you. In this next moment, I will invite you to explore if you can locate the felt sense of this belief, the physiological manifestation of where this issue might be living in your tissues. And so to do that, I will ask you to allow your focus and attention to shift from the mind, moving away from the thoughts, the beliefs, the details of this scenario, and starting to really bring your attention into the body. And so scanning the body here for where you might be feeling a sensation. Exploring if perhaps you can sense some heat, or maybe there's a part of your body that for some reason feels quite cold. You might notice a sense of tightness in the throat, in the chest, or maybe knots in the stomach. you might notice that there is a sensation that has a certain shape or texture. Go ahead and see if somehow you can identify a sensation that is particularly predominant for you in this moment. And without trying to fix or change this sensation, really becoming familiar with the elements. And really asking yourself if you can just allow this sensation to be. And now taking another deep breath, re-anchoring your attention and really gathering your focus and attention on the breath, sinking even deeper into this moment, deepening the quality of your presence. Exhaling deeply. And now asking yourself the question, these beliefs, these thoughts that I am believing to be true, are they completely true? Are these thoughts maybe one-sided? You might ask yourself, what am I unwilling to think, unwilling to consider, unwilling to believe? What am I unwilling to consider, unwilling to believe? Ask yourself. And trusting that intrinsic wisdom in this next moment, just allowing whatever response emerges. What am I unwilling to believe, unwilling to consider? Again, continuing to take the seat of the witness, of the observer, deepening the breath. You might ask yourself, what else might be true? What else might be true? And what do you notice about your experience if you allow yourself to consider if the opposite might be true? If you allow yourself to consider these alternative thoughts? How do these alternatives maybe affect your body, affect the situation? What do you notice? And continuing to rest here in this stillness, in this presence that you have cultivated, explore what it's like for you to not be caught up in your feelings, to take the seat of the witness, take the seat of the observer, and simply observe your thoughts and your beliefs on the screen of your mind. And maybe placing a hand on the chest, really rewarding yourself for taking this moment to be in community, to be in this practice, to connect with yourself and to journey inward. And so, without judging the experience, just take a moment here to notice your presence, notice your state of mind, and notice your being. And as we bring this practice to a close, I'll invite you to take a few deep breaths at your own pace. Slowly bringing your attention back to this present moment. You might find it helpful to notice any sounds that you might be aware of. Notice any movement in the room. And slowly starting to bring some movement back into your body, you might find it helpful to roll the shoulders up and back, maybe shifting the neck from side to side. And when you're ready, feel free to open your eyes and bring your attention back. So, welcome back. If it's helpful, feel free to go ahead and maybe journal about your experience. What did you notice? What did you experience that was unique, different, or really a standout moment for you in this practice? How amazing is it to recognize that we don't have to believe every thought that we have, right? That we can become the master of our minds. Really, the choice is ours. What I'm hoping that you were able to experience in this practice is that the choice is ours. We can either remain to be imprisoned by our thoughts, to be seduced by the untrue stories that we tell ourselves, or we can find liberation and freedom by becoming the master of our minds. And so what we practiced today was by calling to our awareness and experience that we might be having some difficulty with, and really practicing what it's like to constantly unhook from that thought by first assuming the seat of the observer. We can watch the thoughts pop into the screen of our mind. We can observe the beliefs as if watching them on screen. And by creating some distance between the thought, the story, the belief, the scenario, and ourselves, by sinking into that quality of presence, we tap into our resourcefulness. And by unhooking, we can explore other alternatives that might also be true. And so cultivating this mastery of our mind does not require that we sit for 20 or 40 minutes. And certainly what I've come to appreciate is that what we practice in our meditation, what we practice on the cushion, becomes a lot easier for us to access in real life. But we can also start to build our mastery throughout the course of our day in everyday interactions, in the conversations that we have with our loved ones or colleagues, co-workers, friends. Maybe you start to observe yourself during an argument and you start to notice from the seat of the observer, what thoughts am I believing to be true? What is the nature of my thoughts in this moment? Am I blaming? Am I pointing the finger? That's my tendency. I tend to you need to do and be and say. Or maybe you can notice your thoughts while you're working on something, and you can start to see that perfectionism, right? Especially when I'm under pressure, I start to see my perfectionism coming online. And I see my criticism, my self-criticism, my self-judgment as I strive for perfection in those moments. And so just as I was able to, in the moment of catastrophizing about my mother's situation and the possibility that she might be tested positive for COVID, we can notice the tendency of our mind. We can ask ourselves, what am I believing to be true in this moment? In that moment, I was believing that she would do this test, that it would become positive, that she would be admitted, that the family won't be able to see her, that the worst could happen and we might not ever see her again. And by asking myself that question, what am I believing to be true? And what else might be true? What alternatives might be possible, might also be possible? I can, in that moment, again, tap into that resourcefulness, expand the horizon of my mind to include additional possibilities of what else might be true. And so you might also see this in moments when you are caught in difficulty, or you find that that negativity is recurring, that negativity bias is very active. And you can start to ask yourself, that might be true, and you can acknowledge that as a possibility, but what else might also be true? And so we can continue to build this mastery of noticing, and then practice to unlock, to unhook ourselves and unlock possibilities that we might not be considering. There's a story that one of my meditation teachers shares, where they were working with a woman who had just been divorced, and she was having a really difficult time. She found herself blaming her husband for everything that had gone wrong in the relationship. And when they started to investigate what was underneath those thoughts, what they identified was a source of unworthiness, a source of believing that she was not worthy of love, that she had done something wrong, that it was her fault that this marriage had ended. And so in working with those thoughts and identifying what are the origin of these thoughts, she was able to bring to mind her memory of her father leaving when she was the tender age of 6. And she was able to recall the very specific memory of the moment when he left home. She saw him arguing with her mom and screaming and shouting. And she was standing at the staircase, and she saw when he pulled his suitcase and walked out the door. And not for a moment did he look back at her. And so what she was able to uncover is this feeling of unworthiness, this feeling of I did something wrong, this feeling of self-blame originated in that moment when she believed that she was the reason her father left. And this is interesting. What Tara asked her to do was to assume the position of her father. Assume that she was standing in his shoe And what thoughts might he have been believing in that moment? And so she was able to explore a few alternatives to the scenario. There was her perspective and there was his perspective. And in his perspective, she was able to see the pain and anguish that he was experiencing in that relationship. Perhaps he felt trapped, that he needed to get away, that this relationship was unhealthy. And then she asked him, what might he be believing about you, his 6-year-old daughter who is standing there on the staircase? And she said that I love her dearly, and if I dare to look at her even for one moment, I might never leave. And if I never leave, then I will never find my freedom. And so he chose not to look. And with that detangling, by differentiating from her perspective, she was able to assume the perspective of her father and really unhook herself from the belief that it was her fault. She was able to explore the possibility that he might have been thinking something other than what she was believing, which is that it was her fault why he left, that he didn't love her enough, that she did something that made him leave. And so this is what is possible for us. If you find yourself in conversation, in an interaction with someone else, and you're finding it difficult to let go of your own belief, to assume the position of the perspective that that person might be having in that moment, then that is an indication that you are attached to that belief, that you are identified with what you are believing. And the interesting thing is that these beliefs not only shape how we see the world and how we experience different scenarios, but these beliefs, if left unexamined, will start to dictate how we see ourselves, what we believe to be true about ourselves. And so this is the power of building mastery of the mind, is that we can, one, build our awareness and start to notice the nature of our mind. And by noticing the nature of the mind and by understanding the tendencies, I tend to plan, to worry, to judge, to criticize, whatever the case might be, and then practicing the unhooking from those thoughts, assuming the position of the observer, consider the alternatives, and allow yourself to let go of that tight grip that you might be holding about that belief. So I hope that you found this conversation helpful. If you did, please go ahead and write a comment on the bottom. Make sure that you have hit that big red button. And if you find that this might be helpful for a friend or someone else, please go ahead and share the video. Thank you again for joining, and I'll see you next week.